just do a quick introduction and then we can get started. All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Justice and Pieces guest speaker series. Today's guest is Earl Blaney. He is a registered Canadian immigration consultant out of London, Ontario. And thank you very much, Earl, for taking the time and joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks very much for having me.
So Earl, perhaps you could start by telling us how you got into immigration law and what work you do is primarily in your field.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So I studied law at Carleton University and took immigration course with a couple of great profs there. And so I was really interested in practicing immigration law just through that experience. I found it very interesting, just the case law, the whole system. Like, I mean, it's such a really amazing system. You know, with people moving here, changing their entire lives to come to Canada for the betterment of themselves, for the benefit of our country. And the significance of that just really stuck with me. And I was just fascinated by it. So when I finished that, I left the country for a while and I went to Asia and paid back student loans, this kind of thing. But when I was in Asia for, I guess, total 15 years, I obviously was surrounded by a bunch of different people of different ethnicities, Koreans, and then later in the Philippines, when I moved to the Philippines, who were very interested in coming to Canada, because of Canada's reputation, because of their thoughts about what it could mean for their life, in particular, their children's future. And so that also really kind of imposed, it reinvigorated my interest, and I got licensed and decided that I wanted to open a practice. As a Caucasian, I don't have a strong ethnic base in immigrant populations. So I didn't know where to begin, like in terms of starting a practice. And then basically I thought, I just looked at the top 10 list of people of ethnic groups coming to Canada. And, the Philippines at the time was top 3. And, I had a really good connection with the Philippines just from travel and personal interaction, and decided to move to the Philippines to start my practice. So I was there doing that for several years before returning to Canada. Got a job at University of Western, and then started building my practice in Canada. So that's kind of the long story short.
So how would you compare then, or maybe let's start with setting up practice in the Philippines. How would you compare sort of getting clientele there, being a Canadian, and for those wanting to come to Canada, and certainly we could talk about the issues of things like ghost consultants and unlicensed consultants as well, but yeah. How did you find that set up there as well?
Yeah, so it's kind of the Wild West in the Philippines. I mean, the Philippines has done very, very strong numbers coming to Canada since the 1990s. They've been a top 3 immigration source country since, I believe, 2005-ish, right? And so that market is saturated with companies that have been established for a long time. What I noticed very quickly in the Philippines, having had to study, practice management, ethical considerations, and stuff like that in the ICCRC course, in the licensing course, I noticed that it was business before all else there. And what I really noted is that a lot of people are spending a lot of money and not getting results. So it was fairly easy for me to, build a reputation there on strong ethical practice, and that takes you a long way in this business, right? So that was key to establishing a foothold in the market in the Philippines, and that has just over time grown immensely. So yeah.
And so how would you compare then setting up shop in the Philippines versus setting up shop in London?
Sure. So I think, I guess it's tough. I mean,
Now, you mentioned sort of the wild west kind of how there's a lack of regulation surrounding or oversight surrounding international students. Can you maybe elaborate on how do you navigate that and maintaining your own ethical standards, with the ICCRC, to not get sucked into this competition where less than scrupulous practitioners may see the money and do things differently?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, there's money in ethics too. So, don't, I mean, the fact that we're not practicing like most immigration firms or unlicensed consultants in the field, or colleges for that matter, universities, colleges are the big problem. But the fact that we're not doing business like as they do business does not mean that we can't make money. There are a lot of service offerings that we have developed that are entirely focused, entirely focused to empowering the student to make better decisions, right? And so I think that has been our area of focus. Nobody else is doing it that I'm aware of. So I mean, there's a large market for that too, especially with the volume of people who are coming in here. So I think, you just really have to understand the system. You have to look at it from the client's point of view, and understand what they're up against when there are really serious ethical problems in a particular practice area. And, do for them what you would do for yourself if they knew what you knew, right? So I guess that's how we've handled it. And things are going very well. And I think, it's making a big difference for the students who are exposed to it. And we plan on making a big difference in government policy also. And we've had some very good success in those areas. Last week, on Friday, in fact, the minister announced that there was going to be an extension of post-graduation work permits for international students. We were a key player in that. We dealt with a large group of international students who are represented by one very brave young woman named Joyce DePaula. So we were able to, table a, what do you call this? I forget the word, but we were able to table a motion, I guess, in the House of Commons, not a motion, but what do you call this? I forget the word. Not a bill, rather it was we call it a prayer, like sorry, I'm just at a loss for the word. But anyway, we were able to table this in the House of Commons through Elizabeth May, and it was successful on Friday. So that resulted in the extension of post-graduation work permits for every single international student in Canada. They were impacted by COVID-19. They were not able to earn their skilled work experience in Canada due to COVID-19 for the large part. The thing that I know well, and every international student, not every, but 90% of the education export market knows, is that Canada's international education program is not an education program at all. It's an immigration program. 90% of the international students who are coming here, if they would not have the opportunity to proceed to permanent residency in Canada, they would not choose Canada as a study destination. So knowing that, and knowing that they're investing their money, $21 billion for that purpose annually, it causes us to really try to help them achieve their goals. I'm not of the opinion that all international students should become permanent residents just by showing up here. I'm a strong believer in economic class immigration, to be clear, and that international graduates should prove their worth to the Canadian economy. But when they're prevented from doing so because of very poor policy or poor guidance by the system, then somebody needs to stand up for them, right? And so we're doing that, right? Petition is the word I'm looking for. Thank you.
So perhaps maybe you could tell us a bit about how the process works from start to finish, and then maybe we can have a few specific questions relating to that. So someone comes to you and says, hey, I'm from the Philippines, and I'd like to study at the University of Western Ontario. How do I go about doing that?
Sure. So, and again, it really does depend on their goals, because some education export markets are not immigration driven. For example, people coming from England or people coming from the United States are countries with comparative socioeconomics to Canada, right? Their interest may be primarily education, and that's it, right? They're here for the degree, they're here for the experience, and then they want to go home and have tea and crumpets in England or whatever they do. But that is not the case, as Global Affairs Canada well knows, as IRCC, the Immigration Refugee Citizenship Canada well knows, that the majority of education export markets it's immigration driven, right? And so when we encounter a client, and I would say that, probably about 75% of our clientele are Filipino. And this is not a situation unique to the Philippines. I'm not singling out Filipinos. This phenomenon occurs in almost every single education export market with an equal or lower socioeconomic standing than Canada. So the first thing we do is we do an assessment upfront. We do charge a fee for the assessment, and we take them through the mathematics of whether it is possible for them to make this transition, what their previous skills will look like in terms of carryover to the Canadian labor market, what education program and so what education program will they likely be approved a study permit for, and of those education programs, which is most likely to lead to labor market success in Canada. Labor market success is key for international students, because without labor market success, they are not credited points for skilled work in Canada. And in the vast majority of cases, that leads to a mathematical impossibility of them becoming a permanent resident in Canada. You may or may not know this is score based, right? So it's called through Express Entry Comprehensive Ranking System score. So we do the math for them. We use our labor market data and knowledge, right, to say, well, look, this is going to work, this isn't going to work. If you're studying global business management at Seneca College, you might as well just pack your bags after you're done studying, because that does not lead to a skilled position in Canada unless you have the background to make it work, right? So these are things that we know well, because of our connection here to Canada, because of our awareness of the Canadian labor market, which ghost consultants and education agents overseas are totally not aware of, nor do they care. Because what do they care about? They care about putting a student at your college and getting the $2,000 commission from the college for putting the student there. And then they wash their hands of it and on to the next recruitment, right? So my office typically is lined up, not today, it's early, but it's lined up with international students who've graduated, for example, from Fanshawe College here in London, who really have no ability to succeed in Canada once they've graduated. And that's the entire reason that they've invested their family's money and sometimes a small fortune in coming here. And it's a disgrace. So after we do the assessment, we would either tell them directly or not, look, we do not believe that you're going to be successful in your pursuit. And in that case, we would refuse services going forward, right? So that's something that's quite uncommon. And what bothers me, of course, is that they'll go to the next firm and somebody will say, okay, great, you have a great chance, da, 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 and they'll go for it. But we've told them, they're aware, right? So that's key and that's important, right? So that's how we do business here. And then, so if we do have a client that we can see there is good merit to their intention to transition to permanent residency in Canada, it's possible, it's likely or possible, strongly possible, then we would proceed with a service agreement to support their application. You may wonder, or anyone who doesn't do this would probably say, well, geez, why would I pay some guy like you or your firm to prepare an immigration application? The forms are online. There's a guide online which explains how to do it. That's true, but what definitely anyone who practices knows that you may not know is that the checklist or the document checklist is step one. That allows you to submit an eligible application. What is IRCC looking for in terms of approval? Well, study permit approval rates last year globally were at an all-time low. They were it was about 50% approval rate globally. It's an all-time low. So that's about 400,000 applications, 200,000 were refused last year. Not COVID-19 related, just assessment related. How many of those applications were incomplete? Probably about 3%. The other 97% of refusals were refused for reasons that are not on the checklist, that are specific to officer evaluation, right? So that's why you would use this. The other issues are, why do other people use immigration consultants? They're too busy to do it themselves. English is an issue. All the forms are in English or French, obviously. But the main reason would be just savvy of the system and understanding what IRCC is looking for. But you have to be careful about that too, because you do not want to, take a client's, you want to put their best foot forward in terms of presentation to IRCC, but you absolutely do not want to manipulate the application to a point of dishonesty, right? Which would be an ethical violation. There's a line there, right? And again, that comes with ethical practice. So staying behind that line, yeah.
So
Long
you
answer,
mentioned,
sorry.
so you mentioned ghost consultants, and you mentioned, well, let's just start with ghost consultants. So can you explain to us what ghost consultants are and how they negatively impact the profession here?
Sure. So, I mean, ghost consultants. So since, what was it? I forget the date. But anyway, it's been well over 10 years since the government of Canada has said, hey, you know what? We might need to regulate immigration consultants, right? Because look, I'm not going to sidestep the issue, because there is inherent problems with this system. You're dealing with and with ethical practice in this system. There's a lot of dirty consultants, both licensed and unlicensed. I mean, to be clear, you're dealing with an extremely vulnerable demographic group, right? Of people who are not familiar with Canadian laws, people who are desperate at sometimes to make substantial improvements in their life. See Canada, as the green pasture. You have a substantial amount of people who are desperate to reunite with family members, right? And so on and so forth. So that desperation and that vulnerability, right, added to the fact that these are high value applications. I mean, paralegals, I mean, there's no question you can make money in the industry being a paralegal, and paralegals, some of them do make good money. But what are your earnings limited by, right? Your earnings basically are limited by, what is the set fine, right? What is the government trying to charge you here? How much is this going to cost you? Immigration consultants are limited by how much is it worth for you to get into Canada, to change your life, right? So I think it's fair to say, I mean, we're going to make a lot more money than you guys are. So when you add huge volumes of money into these applications and this vulnerability, I mean, it's inherent that there's ethical problems in this industry, huge ethical problems in this industry. And those ethical problems extend beyond ghost consultants. But to answer your question, ghost consultants, the term ghost consultant, which is often heard, these are people who are not licensed, right? Who are immigration practitioners, who are unlicensed immigration practitioners. Why is this a problem? Because there's zero accountability, right? I mean, they can get sued civilly, locally in their home country, if anything comes of that. But basically, there's no regulatory body hanging over their head, reviewing their conduct, with the ability to sanction them, right? So that is something that the LSO does for you. That is something the ICCRC, now the College of Canadian Immigration Consultants, does for us, right? And if there are problems with a licensed consultant, you can make the report, you can make the complaint. We have errors in admission insurance, as do you, right? So these are things that we have that ghost consultants don't have. The other thing, of course, which is common amongst us, RCICs and paralegals, is that we have practice management. We have professional development requirements that we have to meet each year. So we're on top of things. Ghost consultants, it's business. I mean, business is business. I mean, some of these guys, might as well be running a bubblegum manufacturing machine, because it's basically the level of ethics that's involved in what they're doing. No accountability, no oversight, business, business, business. And this is way worse in some areas than other, but it's a global problem. And I have been frustrated often with the council, with the ICCRC, in their willingness to take action on these issues, to be clear. However, I will say that one of the reasons that the ICCR has transgressed into the College of Canadian Immigration Consultants is because they felt that their rules and regulations that formed the council were not enough, they were not empowered enough to take action. So I think that's one of the main reasons that they moved forward with the College Act, to transform into the College of Immigration Consultants, so they could take a stronger role and lead in reaching out to try to solve some of these problems in the industry, right? Not only with their own members, but of course with people practicing without a license, right? So hopefully, I have high hopes that will go better. We're going to have a hard time. The government of Canada is also not doing a good job. They're doing a very poor job, because they do have pretty good ability, or at least reasonable ability to screen these applications to make sure ghost consultants aren't involved. And in many cases, they don't even review that, right? And that's on record. So that's something that also needs to change.
Right, and I think talk quite a bit about ethics. I think, as you mentioned, there's a lot of money involved, and certainly it's unique that you said, well, hey, if I don't think this application has a very strong chance of being successful, that I'm going to pass on it, right? Because uh, there's nothing stopping you saying, look, I don't think this is a very good merit, but I'll do it anyways, provided you're paying the money. What have you found in taking that approach? I mean, I would like to think probably you have a high success rate as a result, so you don't have too many unhappy customers, but is that sort of the rationale for it, or um,
Well, I
what?
think it's two things. I think that that's one thing. I mean, there's no question about it. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, ethics and knowledge, you have to be balanced with business. I mean, we are we're a firm. Our purpose also is to produce results financially, right? So, you know, somebody once told me, or somebody said, or maybe I read it, one one unsuccessful client will lead to 700 poor reviews in that client's lifetime of your practice if given the opportunity, right? Whereas one positive success story will lead to double, right? And what we find, having been in business now almost 8 years, I guess, is that we don't advertise anymore. Our referral base is so strong that we don't have to spend even $1 or 1 minute on a Facebook post advertising our services, right? So I think that goes a long way. I think our approach goes a long way. Sure, people are not happy sometimes with our decision not to represent them or not to take their file, for sure. But I'm okay with that. They will reach out to someone else. They will most likely, in my view, be unsuccessful, and they will come back and realize, what, this guy was right. He tried to do the right thing here, right? And doing the right thing, as Spike Lee would say, goes a long way. But the other point I was going to make on that has just drifted away. Sorry.
So what happens, I guess, in the situations where someone is unsuccessful? Let's say with another practitioner, or they do it on their own, or through a ghost consultant or anything like that. And then do you do any like what's the process if you're refused there for an international student visa?
So yeah, so that's a very good question. So I mean, this there's as you may know, and maybe the same in your decision. Like, so I mean, IRCC is basically a tribunal, right? So the bottom line is that when a tribunal makes a decision, because of the level of expertise, according to case law, a high degree of difference is awarded to the officer's decision. Officers make very bad decisions all the time, and I don't necessarily fault the officer for that. I think they're dealing with a really high volume of applications, number one. And there's a quota system in processing often at embassies, so they're doing one every 7 minutes or something like that. Takes you 6 hours, sometimes longer, to prepare an application for their review, and they review it in 5 or 6 minutes. They're going to make mistakes, and mistakes are really common. But the question is, what is a mistake? Because so much deference is owed to their opinion that as long as it's reasonable, right, and reasonable from a legal point of view, which is a very long, very wide scope, right? Basically, if someone could come to this conclusion based on these set of facts, it's okay, right? So how can you overturn a decision like that? I mean, so the first thing that we would always do is use Access to Information Act and get the visa officer's case notes and look through how the officer made his or her decision, and based on the set of facts. So, sometimes it can be solved by a reapplication, by a cover letter highlighting, look, I mean, you said this, but you missed this on page 3, or maybe you didn't consider this, which was on page 14, or there's no reference to these sets of facts, and so that's one way of handling this decision. The other way, of course, is to go to federal court. Now, immigration lawyers, generally speaking, the fees for that start at about $3,500, and they get as high as $10,000, depending on who you're dealing with. So my recommendation is always to try a reapplication, because if you're dealing with a licensed representative, I mean, our fees are going to be way, 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 way under that. And probably a third, right? More or less $1,000, right, or less, right? So the bottom line is, yeah, you would probably want to try that approach first before filing federal court review. But I mean, there are a lot of times visa officers make the right decision also, and it's unpopular with the client. And so then it's a matter of sitting down with the client and saying, look, here's the problem. They're not going to let you come to Canada as a student to study a one-year program with your accompanying spouse and your 3 kids from the Philippines. Because if you do that, what are the chances you're ever going to leave Canada and go back to your job as a server in the Philippines, right? It's highly unlikely. I know that, and you know that, and the government of Canada knows that. So you need to consider that perspective. The immigrant would never be happy about that, but in many cases, providing some light on why these decisions are made at least makes it more acceptable or understood, because they often don't understand why they've been refused, because their previous agency has told them, oh, this is a slam dunk, we'll get it through, give me $2,000, right? So I think, just knowledge is power, knowledge is empowerment, right? So I think that is often built into our approach also.
Excellent. And I think certainly sometimes you have to deliver the bad news there that it doesn't work out, and all you can do is do your best. And I think a lot of people have this expression, shoot for the stars and you'll land amongst the moon. But if you tell a client or you overpromise and underdeliver, regardless of what you've promised and what you've delivered, they're still going to be a little disappointed. So better to be upfront, I think.
And exactly correct, right? So make them aware of why this is a high risk application at the beginning. Make them aware of, like I've seen similar cases like this before. This is how it's turned out in this case. This is how it's turned out in this case. It could go either way. I think managing client expectations is crucial. There is some reservation, of course, to do that, especially when you first start practicing, because, geez, I got a client and, maybe we're going to make money this month, right? So, and you want to facilitate naturally, I think, business, but that's bad business long term, right? And your reputation in this field is the key to your success in this field, period. There are people who make a lot of money and don't worry about that. Those are really large firms usually. But I mean, for your average person who's starting an immigration practice, your reputation and your client management skills are extremely important to your success. There's no question about it. And best to know as much as you can and be upfront as much as you can in all cases, without exception. Yeah.
Now, immigration files, I mean, maybe not as much with the international students, but still take a long time to process from beginning to end. And we were talking about client expectations. What about in terms of communications with clients throughout that process? How do you handle keeping those expectations in line? Or if you get some, maybe a document was missing, or otherwise you're waiting and waiting and waiting. And again, it's a pretty important period in their lives, because it'll determine where perhaps the rest of their lives will be spent.
Absolutely. What a great question. That is an excellent question. And I think anyone who does this and even work for clients as paralegals is going to really struggle with what the client's needs and expectations are compared to what how you can go home without drinking at night. So yeah, I mean, client management, I mean, if you do one thing at the beginning of your practice, figure out how you're going to intake clients and manage clients. Work at a system. It won't be perfect at first, but it can be improved over time. That minimizes client interaction. And I don't mean that to say that you should shun the client or neglect the client. You should never, of course. But there's a big difference between that and managing your own sanity. When we first started, and my wife would attest to this because she used to freak out. I would exchange probably upwards of, I would say, 250 emails with the client on a study permit application. We would go back and forth, back and forth. I had no idea what I was doing. I had no system in place. I just winged it, right? And many of you will do that, despite what your teachers tell you or what I tell you. I mean, you'll do it anyway. But the bottom line is there will come a time where that is totally unmanageable, and best to sort it out front. So what do we do now? So after the client has retained us, we manage a Skype or Zoom. What happened to Skype? How did Zoom get so big? But anyway, a Skype or Zoom consultation with the client, where it's quite personal, and I spend 30 minutes to an hour for a complex case with a client. So we get to know each other pretty well. I ask them all the pertinent questions. I identify the strengths and weaknesses of the application, and set their expectations for the file. So look, here, I think this is going to be successful, but or I think this won't be successful except for if we could change this, or this, or support this or this point. From that communication, do you have this? Like, do you have anything, in this area, this weak area to support? What do you have to support the strength of the application? And then from that meeting, I sit down with my administrative staff, who are excellent, also key to business, administrative staff. You won't be able to manage a business forever by yourself, probably. You need some really good administrative support. And those are not necessarily skills that are ingrained in everyone. But I sit down with my fantastic A+ administrative team, and we create a document checklist for the client. We set up an online file drop system for the client. We give them the checklist with firm instructions to follow the checklist, and until you cannot possibly follow it anymore, dump everything in the drive, and then we conduct a file review. If you start going document by document with client, not only will you be totally wasting your time, but you will not be focused on the case at hand, because you'll be doing that for 10, first 2, then 5, then 10, then 20, then 100 clients at the same time. And you'll make mistakes. You will not be focused. You will not be concentrated. You will mix up and confuse facts from one file to the other. It is a total disaster and a disservice to your client. So we minimize that. We compartmentalize that to, number one, hi, how you doing? Tell me about your case. Give me all that I need to know. 2, client checklist, drop drive. 3, review the client file. If they've had problems finding documents or putting documents, address it then, review all documents together, send it back. Last time, the client fixes everything, sends it back, one final file review, then submission, right? So that's the process, and we stick to it at all times. If there's a client who does not follow that process, we just refer to the retainer agreement, where that is firmly laid out in the retainer agreement. So look, you've agreed to this process. Here it is. If you can't follow the process, we're going to have to part ways here, because it is not worth your time. It is not worth your energy. And it's a disservice to the client. You're not accomplishing a high level of service for the client.
Right, especially once I think the mistake that happens is that when you start with one client or 2 clients, it's easy to send all those emails, and then suddenly you have 25, 50, 100. It's impossible, right?
We're down now, and we do audit this also, because they're awesome. So we move, not really an exaggeration. For the first client, it's probably 250. To now we're down to 14 emails per file, so it's pretty good.
Now, in terms of once the decision is made, they come to Canada, they start their studies. Again, as you mentioned, most of them are going to be coming back to you maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, depending on their program, and now saying, Earl, how do we become permanent residents? So do you have a lot of say repeat clients that were you initially brought for international students, and do you do that process for apply for the permanent residence, or are you strictly focused on the international student side?
No, it's an immigration lifestyle, life cycle, right? So yeah, they're coming as international students for a reason, and that reason is to become permanent residents in our markets that we deal with, right? So we handle client services throughout that entire immigration life cycle. So you have to represent, you have to understand the value of the client to your firm. You also have some ownership over the process, right? Because and some duty, because you've pre-screened them before. So I mean, like if it's an initial client of ours, right? They've contacted us from overseas. We've agreed that they're good candidates for this. We've set them up with an academic program. Then after that is post-graduation work permit. Then we'd probably bring them in again at that time, because immigration law does change, and point system even changes, right? Provincial nomination or provincial options change. So we bring them in again at post-graduation work permit phase and say, okay, look, here are the changes. Here's what's changed from your report. Here's where you are now, and here's where you need to be. So update their planning then. They've still got the blueprint in front of them. What I can't do for them, unfortunately, we'd like to do a lot more of it, try to get employers involved. But there's only so much we can do. But the bottom line is, what I can't do for them is get them jobs, right? I can't say, look, you're going to go get a job, go start working here. Unfortunately, we can't do that. So some of this definitely is up to them. And so we've screened that as well as we possibly can. But getting the interview, is up to you. So and then through that process, assuming it goes successful, then the next step is the permanent residency application. Work permit updates for spouse, study permit updates for kids. So I mean, there are probably about, on average, if it's a family, you're dealing with probably about 12 applications in that immigration life cycle through permanent residence. So I mean, that's you have enough families under your belt, you're doing pretty well, right? If you're doing a good job. By the way, the overall success rate of international students coming to Canada without screening, who want to become not all of the international students, because not all want to, but all of the international students who want to come to Canada, the success rate of the number that want to is less than 25%, to give you some idea of how poorly managed the system is.
And is that number with relation to those who are here and then as students that end up becoming permanent residents?
Yeah, exactly. Less than 25% of the 100% that want to become permanent residents that are coming here for that purpose, less than 25% of that group are successful statistically, right? So, I mean, this is a huge problem for the integrity of Canada's immigration system. It's probably a huge problem for the future of Canada's education export system too, because as those students eventually go home, unsuccessful, they're going to be the world's worst spokesperson for Edu Canada, right? Huge problem moving forward, has to be addressed.
Right, I think that's where we speak to the multi-billion-dollar industry, right? Because if people are coming here for education purposes only because they want to get the permanent residency after, well, if they're seeing those numbers being low, then why spend the time for the education, right? Is essentially what you're saying.
Yeah, and I'm saying that they're wasting their money is what I'm saying, exactly, right? And colleges are encouraging it left and right. I mean, we see colleges, Fanshawe College here, I hate to pick on Fanshawe, but they're right under my nose, waiving English language requirements for international students, right, to facilitate market share. And when the student gets in the classroom, they can't pass the class, and they certainly can't get a job post-graduation because their English proficiency isn't high enough. Great for Fanshawe College, a lot of students come, because they'll skip that, they'll take that shortcut. If you offer a 21-year-old that shortcut, they'll take it. Anyone really, but long-term disaster. And there are 100 different issues like that, but yeah.
Now, what happens in terms of finding, let's say, a place? So let's continue picking on Fanshawe, but any school, right? If they come to you and say, well, I'm interested in this type of work, do you know where I can go and study? And I mean, I don't know if there is licensed or unlicensed. We were talking about the ethics there, that say, hey, let me call up Fanshawe, my buddy at the admission department, and then I can get a percentage for them. Is that something that people, well, first of all, is that something that people do, and is that something that is ethically sound within the rules of the ICCRC and so forth?
Well, so the ICCRC, like when you're dealing with education recruitment, it's outside their jurisdiction, right? So they focus on your immigration practice. So although that is exactly connected, the ICCRC is not going to get their hands dirty dealing with that. Probably they should. There are, I can't get in, because like I don't want to get sued. But I mean, I could definitely name huge players in the Canadian industry who are, yeah. Anyway, so the issue is this. I think your question is, setting them up with a college program for money, is this ethical or not? No, it's a disgrace. So how do these people make their money? They make 15% or 20% of tuition for first year, right? So that goes to the person who places them at the school. So that works out to about, because international students are paying 15, 16, 17, $18,000 a year at the college level. So the bottom line is that works out to about $2,000 per student placement, right? It's good money, really good money, right? I mean, if you're placing 50 students a year, you're doing pretty well. And that's without immigration billing, right? So, I mean, this is a big business. There are companies so the concern is, are you placing them in a school because of the money? Or are you placing them in a school because it's best for the student? The answer to that question is obvious. I mean, it's an obvious answer, right? Is that an ethical concern? 100%, absolutely, it's an ethical concern. The bigger ethical concern, in my opinion, is the colleges and universities. How are they selecting their education agents to begin with? Are they what kind of screening are they doing in terms of their business background, their ethics background, their whatever? None is the answer to the question. You have huge companies in Canada right now that are operating what I call umbrella recruitment schemes, and anyone can sign up with these. So it's a company that has a connection with the college, a contractual agreement for recruitment, and then they're subletting that contractual agreement out to, in some case, 4,000, 5,000 different education agents. The school themselves doesn't even know who those education agents are, has no idea. Umbrella recruitment, it's a disaster. So yeah, I mean, there are massive ethics problems in this industry, huge. But it's a $21 billion industry.
Now, related to that, I guess, in terms of maybe stuff that we haven't covered here, just looking at wrapping up, what do you see in terms of the future there in the international student side, the changes to kind of make the process more efficient, more effective? If you had the opportunity, or you're talking about work in petitions and government policy and things like that, what do you think would address some of these issues?
Well, I think the number one thing, I mean, two things. Number one, you have to license and regulate education consultants, period. Right? I mean, there's absolutely no excuse that there is no regulatory body that overlooks education consultants. I mean, it's happening in New Zealand, Australia, and so forth. We're about 10 years behind them on that front. We have done absolutely nothing. Global Affairs is acutely aware of the problems. They don't care, right? So because there are 21 billion reasons not to care and to look the other way. That's number one. Number two, in my opinion, what needs to happen here is, because there are such high volumes of international students coming to Canada for the primary purpose of long-term immigration, I think, and because the success rate is so poor, right? I think the thing that has to happen here is we have to divide our system into education programs that are that will facilitate immigration, such as programs that lead to fix labor market shortages, programs that are fundamentally connected to our economic program policy planning, labor market stuff, right? Whether it's caregivers right now or whether it's IT, right? If you're coming to study in these programs, Canada does want you to stay, and there's a pathway for you. Whereas there's a whole other section of programs like global business management, or what other garbage program they're selling at these colleges, that will not lead to a successful labor market outcome, that will not lead to filling a skill shortage, that we don't need employees in this area. And if you want to come and study that in Canada, you are more than welcome. You might even be able to stay for a year after graduation and work and enjoy Canada, whatever. But after that, please know that you're going home. And to let people know in advance, you're in this path or that path. Because right now, it's being sold as one path, and it's not. So that would be the two biggest fixes. And then I would just I would stop talking about this and I would enjoy my life. Yes.
Perfect. So thank you so much, Earl, for taking the time and joining us this morning. I thought it was very insightful and certainly learned a lot about how international students in the process and what we can do to fix some of these deficiencies. Because I think you hit the nail right on the head there is if people are coming here for the purposes of later becoming permanent residents and the education, yes, they're gaining knowledge and it's just a step on that path. When the path is not completed, then why even take those steps that are now setting them back a year, 2 years, 4 years, depending on the program, and then they're back in their home country with
And it's not just the
education.
time, it's the money. I mean, people
Yeah.
sell their businesses. People borrow money off family. I mean, in these countries, people liquidate their assets for this opportunity, right? So it's not time that I'm worried about. It is the damage that this is causing to families overseas, and it's a disgrace.
Any final words of advice for my paralegal students who are looking to either potentially get into immigration or within their scope practice immigration, which also could change, in making that transition from student to practitioner and maybe not repeating some of the common mistakes that we were talking about that have been made?
Sure. I just think like I like to say a couple things. I think in closing briefly. I mean, number one, I support paralegals in their interest and goals of extending their scope of practice in other areas of immigration law. The Law Society is against that for whatever reason, But the bottom line, I think a lot of their counter. Yeah, I mean, obviously they're worried about competence. That's one thing. I think schools like Trios and other schools that run paralegal programs should make sure that immigration is embedded in the learning material there. I think that would go a long way in helping paralegals accomplish that goal. So that's number one. Just in terms of general practice advice, I mean, we need people in this profession. There is so much work to do in this profession. Like you can't keep up with it, right? So nobody's worried here. No consultant in their right mind would be worried about bringing more people into this profession. Like I said, 9,000 paralegals in Ontario, 6,000 RCICs globally, right? We need help for sure. Competent people, ethical people in this field. So we welcome you. I would personally vote in favor of that any day of the week, so long as the education background backed it up. In terms of you guys, trying to figure out what you're going to do, what scope of, what are you going to practice? Because I know my wife, when she was taking the paralegal program, she was wondering about that. I think again, like I said before, specializing in one or two fields, I think, it's going to be hard to get by as a paralegal in one field, but two related fields, I think, that's probably what you guys want to be focused on. If you're too focused on everything, it's not going to go well. I would develop an area of specialization. Also, while you specialize and become specialized, you will find that there are problems with the system, that things are not right or things need to be fixed. Speak up. Don't just practice. Speak up. Advocate. Make change in the system. Make positive improvements. Super important. The very last thing, because I know we're out of time and I can talk for hours. So the very last thing I would say is knowledge is extremely important in this business, in this field. Knowledge is your reputation, but also these business skills that they're teaching in these programs. When I took my course, I guess I did it at Humber College, and those business courses, I breezed over them. I didn't pay much attention. Pay attention, because business skills, business management skills will, if you don't have them, they will come back and haunt you. You're going to end up working 18 hours a day. You're going to end up being unhappy. You're going to gain 60 pounds. You're going to end up drinking too much and eating too much. Business skills, compartmentalization. If you don't have the skills, reach out, find someone who does. And that's it. I talk to your peers. Your peers are there to help you. I also thought that when I joined this, everyone was competing against everyone. You would be shocked to find out how many people who have been practicing for a long time could use able hands. They have ideas. They have things that they want to implement. They need people. And when they help you, don't forget to say thank you, right? That's all.
Perfect. So say my thank you right now to you, Earl, for joining us today. Really appreciate all the advice and the passion that you have for your field, and wish you all the best and in all these uncertain times there, and all the best with getting the changes. Hopefully, you'd like to see done over the next few years. Take care.
100%. Thank you, man. Good luck at everyone at Trios College. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. Take
Thank
care.
you so much, Earl, and thank you, JP. Have a great one.
Thank you very much. Bye.